all systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 2 live stream for the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. Gonna get you guys ready for all your lineups tomorrow with any questions that you have down in chat. And look at the weather report over there for Friday, some DFS strategy, some shots gained recap, a little lineup construction to tie it all together, and hopefully we can make round 2 one to remember here this weekend. It's a signature event. We got a little edge when it comes to these golf courses, so we'll talk about all that over the next 5-10 minutes. But first off, I need you guys to smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Say hi down in the live chat as well. Let's get after it over here for Friday. And so we got Go Collet down there with the SHIPIT logo. Let's go. What's going on? Welcome on in. We got Anthony down there too, who tells everyone to go out there and hit the like button. You know what's up, Anthony. Welcome on in. And what's going on, Philly Phantom? Hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. But let's talk about these golf courses and how we can leverage this data out here for tomorrow. So the Pebble Beach golf links played significantly easier than what we had with the Spyglass Hill. But in general, the courses played pretty easy. I think the courses were expected to play a lot more difficult. You heard players talking about those firm conditions, but Pebble Beach played 3.8 under par. And though it was about a stroke and a half harder over there at Spyglass, it played easier than what you had in 2024, which was a rained out week. There was definitely a lot more wind in play, but you had lift clean in place for most of that event, which is kind of surprising to see the scoring improve here in 2025. But the important part over for our showdown lineups is that Pebble Beach was the course that you wanted guys on today, and that was despite them having some of the lower tier players on it. Your Scotty Schefflers, your Rory, most of your top end of the board were guys that were starting at Spyglass Hill, and while you had a few of them show up in terms of your top scores, Henley, your first round leader, started over there at Spyglass. If you look at the guys just below that top tier, it is a vast majority Pebble Beach. I mean, look at this, right? 4 of those 6 at Pebble, another streak of 5 players before your next Spyglass Hill. And then if you go the whole way down to the guys that are T36 or better, I guess the T23s and up, I mean, it's almost all sea of blue that you see over here on the left. So that stroke and a half difference definitely mattered when it came to round number 1. And that was even with the worst guys playing at Pebble Beach. Now that you have your Rorys, your Scotties, most of your top level talent over there at Pebble Beach, I think it could actually be an even bigger difference over there for round number 2. Now the weather is going to be a little bit spicier, so I think it's a good time to touch on that. The wind gusts in the afternoon are expected to kick up a little bit, but some of your early guys over there on Pebble Beach, they're going to play 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of their rounds before any of the wind kicks up, are going to be playing on an extremely soft and very scoreable golf course. So when we go over here to the tee times and we take a look at round 2, I'm actually going to bring up just the guys over here in Pebble Beach. Your first hour, maybe even hour and a half of tee times, so that would be up until about maybe 1 local over here. Most of your tee times, they're going to get in a good portion of their rounds before any of these winds start to kick up. And I'll bring up all 5 at the same time, all models, so you can see them all over here for Friday. Most of the real wind and wind gusts don't kick up until about 11 or about 12 or even 1 p.m. local time. And with them starting at 8:30 a.m., that means that those first half an hour, maybe even the first hour of tee times are going to get to at least hole 12, maybe even hole 14, 15 before the wind starts to become a massive factor. And just to show you guys when the wind gusts kick up, this NEM model has it coming in closer to like noon when you have the wind gusts getting to about 20 miles an hour. But even then, that's a 3.5 hour window of guys on the Pebble Beach golf links probably going absolutely nuclear. And just to add on top of that a little bit more, the front 9 of Pebble is a lot more scoreable than the back. You can see it played 2.3 under par on the front side. So those guys that are starting on Pebble Beach early and also on the front 9, I think could get off to nuclear starts out there for round 2. So players to keep an eye on that fit that kind of tee time mold would be your Keith Mitchells, Denny McCarthy over there, the Adam Scott, Gary Woodland group. Will Zalatoris, Chris Kirk also going off of hole number 1. Hideki and Sepp Straka, Billy Horschel and Brendan Todd. And then, I'd even include guys down here like Tom Kim, Colin Morikawa. They're going to be on that front 9 that played more than 2 strokes under par in pretty much perfect conditions, because when we go back to the 5 model setup, you'll see up until about noon, they're calling for 5 miles an hour at the very most. And there are a few models that are calling for some weather, some rain, namely over there in the afternoon. Mostly this Icon model, a little bit up there in the GFS, but those AMT times, those guys starting on their front 9 early aren't going to be dealing with any of that sort of mess. So I think if there's going to be an edge over there for round 2 showdown, and I think there could be a pretty sizable one over there for our lineups, it's play all of your player pool over there in Pebble Beach. I don't see a reason to play anyone from Spyglass. I know that Pebble, by the way, is more exposed to the wind, but Spyglass is still going to have wind itself, right? Just because it's a little bit more protected doesn't mean that its average is going to be affected, not at all, right? It's obviously going to have some effect over there too, maybe a slightly larger effect over here at Pebble Beach, but remember that it was already a 1.5 stroke difference, and you have the better players going from Spyglass over there to Pebble Beach. So I think that you should be focusing a vast majority of your lineups on these guys on Pebble Beach, and with the added caveat that the earlier the tee time that you have, the better, because you're going to be able to get more of your round in before those winds kick up. And it's not just the guys starting on hole 1, your JJ Spawn, Doug Gim group, your Grazeman, Russell Henley, also all these other guys starting on hole 10 like Dunlap Rogers are also going to be a pretty significant advantage over there for round number 2. So in my projections, those are going to be accounted for, something that I'm really going to build around out there in my player pool. And personally, this doesn't have to be how you go about it, because obviously a few Spyglass guys still got the job done when you have those windy conditions, but I'm only going to play guys over there at Pebble Beach. I just think it's the prudent thing to do when you have over a stroke advantage. And with the talent gap really kind of, I think, making up for a lot of that wind difference tomorrow, I think it's going to be at least a shot between the 2 golf courses, if not a 1.5 strokes like you had there for round number 1. Let's go through some shots gained metrics to go through what we saw out there on both courses. This is the first year that at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am that we have shot length for both courses in play. So we always had it for the Pebble Beach course, but now over there at Spyglass, we have lasers and we have all of that data to work with, which means we don't have half the field with shots gained metrics and then half of them without it, which gives us a pretty good measure of how guys were playing in round 1. So we're going to be able to do our full deep dive over there. I'm going to catch up on chat, see what's going on down there, see if there's any questions when it comes to the course or the wind. But afterwards, let's try and find some value, some guys that could be due for some regression over there in round 2. What's going on, Andy? What's going on, Joe? Longtime listener, first-time chatter. Welcome on into the chat. We'd love to have you. And I'm doing well, Sully. Thank you for asking. Just chilling. I have a few projections to do after this, but a pretty good start to the week for my outrights. Props, I went pretty light round 1 because I didn't feel that great about it. Got smacked over there, but pretty much all my other pieces of exposure are going well, and I can't complain. We get to see Jordan Spieth playing golf this week. Scotty Scheffler still looks like the absolute king. Can't complain. What's going on? Michael said, looking forward to the weekend weather. I agree. So Saturday, Sunday, I don't think it's going to be as calm like what you're alluding to there. And the pin locations, let's add that on top of that too, Michael. The pin locations are going to be a lot more tricky as well. Pro-Am's done after 2 days, by the way, if you guys didn't know that. But let's go through some of the shots gained metrics. So what I normally like to do after round 1 is try and find some of your approach poppers. Now, these are coming from different golf courses, so we mostly want to focus on the guys that are going to be playing Pebble Beach tomorrow. But like a Justin Thomas was number 1 in the field when it came to shots gained approach, was actually okay with the putter, slightly positive out there with just under a 0.5 stroke gained there, but he's playing Pebble Beach tomorrow. So he went out there, was absolutely striping it, and is going to get the better side of the conditions. Now, he does have a later tee time. In fact, he's the last group off tomorrow, so he's going to be playing maybe half of his round without the wind. Maybe it'll start kicking up around holes 8 or 9 out there for Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas, but you're not going to have your entire player pool starting early, right? If you go back to the tee times, just to reiterate that, like you've got Adam Scott, who's like 7,700, maybe guys like Grazeman and Zalatoris, who are there in the 8K range, but you don't really have a whole lot of spend ups that are going off early. You've got Hideki, who I guess you could play over here from Pebble Beach, and that's about it, right? Jason Day, he's up there in the top end of that 8K range. you're probably going to have to play a few guys like whether it be a Scotty, Justin Thomas. Those are going to be my favorites over there for Showdown tomorrow, just because they were hitting the ball the best. So obviously JT at the top end of the approach list, but Scotty Scheffler down there at number 3. So if anyone had any questions about how he was going to respond to the injury, he answered those emphatically today. The bogey at hole number 1 definitely had me worried. I bet him outright, obviously a core play for me. I'm hoping he does pretty well. But as soon as he got past, I guess it was this par 3, he missed the par 3 when it came to his green regulation. I mean, it was perfect from there on out. I mean, look at this green regulation at the bottom. He didn't miss a green after his 3rd hole today, started on the back side of the card. And the putter wasn't even special. You can see he actually was slightly into the positive, just under a 1/3 of a stroke gained, and he shot -5. I mean, this is just vintage Scotty Scheffler, what we're used to seeing from him, just wearing out the golf course from tee to green. These sort of guys that have later tee times, Scotty has a slightly earlier tee time than what you have there with Justin Thomas, but he's not ideal when it comes to that starting time. I'm still going to have guys like that in my player pool. So I think the approach play is a good way to try and find some of your studs up top. Like a Rory McIlroy, another guy had a really good ball striking day. So not only hit the ball well in approach, but compared to these other top level players, the hole-in-one, by the way, definitely helps the approach numbers. So maybe take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. That helped him for well over a shot gained right there, but he also gained a stroke and a half off the tee. So, without the hole-in-one, he was still into the positive with his iron play. One of the best players when it came to shots gained off the tee is the kind of player that I'd be using as a spend up. So without giving away too much out there with my personal player pool, obviously I try to keep this more process based over here on the channel. I'm trying to look for ball strikers, and that's the most sustainable sort of shots gained metrics from round to round. Putting tends to be very variant. A lot of it comes down to luck. Shots gained around the green a lot of times comes down to luck. So we're trying to find guys that were hitting the ball in a sustainable way, and that hopefully when they wake up tomorrow, aren't completely different. Like that's going to happen in a few cases. You're going to have guys that completely fall off with their ball striking, but when you take a look at the top end of the ball striking from round number 1, you're going to see, maybe half the guys up there towards the top also go out there and do it in round 2. And those are going to be your guys up there in the top 5, top 10 after round number 2. So guys like JT, guys like Scotty Scheffler are towards the top of my short list for that reason. The opposite end of that spectrum, guys that lost a lot of strokes on approach, might want to raise a massive red flag. And, the one real big one be a Ludwig Bear, who's still dealing with the flu-like symptoms. On the No Laying Up podcast, told them that he was feeling well. So I guess maybe they crept back in this morning when it came to those symptoms. But -5 shots gained approach is really, really ugly. And considering that he shot 5 over par, I don't think a lot of people are going to get to a Luddy. But if you can stomach the bounce back, I believe he's playing Pebble Beach. Let me just double check that. Yeah, I know for a fact actually that he's playing over there at Pebble Beach. He would be extremely low owned, so you'd be able to get a lot of leverage if you went there. But all these other guys that are deep into the red, like a Brendan Todd, Hadwin, Wyndham Clark, et cetera, you're only going to play these sort of guys down here if they're super low owned and if you need to get leverage to the field. So, for example, Wyndham Clark, I believe, is playing. Actually, he may have played Pebble today. Let me double check on that, so I'm not giving you guys false information. So he ended up playing Spyglass Hill over there for tomorrow. So you won't want to play a guy like Wyndham Clark. But, some of those other pivots up there towards the top that are playing at Pebble Beach, you're only really going to get to them if you're looking to get leverage. You're not going to use them as a core play. I wouldn't recommend using those kind of guys in single entry, any of your high dollar GPPs. It's just taking on way too much risk. You're going to have other guys that are lower owned that you can get to that didn't lose 4 or 5 shots gained approach in round number 1. So you can use them as pivots. They're not completely out of play. As DGen75 would say, or he could on a lot of these kind of players. Like Ludwig sucked round 1. He obviously couldn't do it in round number 2, or as he would say, right, or he could go out there and get it done in round 2. So just kind of know what you're getting yourself into with playing some of these guys towards the bottom. But if any of them are mega chalk, then you know for a fact that I'm not going to be playing them. In terms of your putting, I also like to take a look at the guys that gained a bunch over there and know that it's going to be really tough for those players to go out there and back it up. So though Russell Henley is playing Pebble Beach tomorrow, is going to be on the proper side of the draw, he gained over 5 or nearly 6 strokes when it came to his short game. So over 2 strokes around the green, over 3.5 strokes when it came to the putting, which is going to be extremely hard to replicate. And considering that he lost on approach, was just slightly into the positive off the tee, like he's the perfect kind of fade candidate over there for Showdown. Now, could he go out there tomorrow and still shoot like -5, -6? For sure. But when you're looking at the stats and, you're trying to make an educated guess on a player's trajectory, carrying yourself by chipping in and making a bunch of 20, 30 footers doesn't feel like the most sustainable thing from day to day. Sam Stevens gained a bunch of strokes putting. Lucas Glover did as well, which, by the way, if you know anything about Glover's game, that should be a massive red flag, given that he's one of the worst putters that we have in the field historically. But in EVR, Ben Griffin, all these guys up here towards the top. Bazane Hoot, by the way, screwed me on a prop I played. I had him for an under 4.5 birdies. And he gained nearly 2 strokes putting, made a bunch of like 20, 30 footers. And that's not something that he's going to do most rounds out there on the PGA Tour. So the top end of this putting list, there might be a handful, 3, 4 of them that go out there and, end to the positive 1.5, 2 shots gained again. But a vast majority of these players are going to be about average, if not into the negative when it comes to their shots gained on putting. If we take a look at around the green, we can say a lot of the same. It's also extremely variant. Guys like Hideki Matsuyama got extremely lucky. Russell Henley, as we've already outlined. But a Højgaard, who's also going to be at Pebble Beach, he hit the ball well. So his ball striking went really well. But he also got a little lucky with the short game. So -7, he's going to be chalky over there at Pebble Beach. Maybe he's another player to potentially avoid and hope that he comes down to earth with the ball striking as well. But this whole list, the whole way down to these guys that are dark green, are players that I'd be looking at twice before I go out there and play as a core play. Now, if they're low owned, like a Denny McCarthy, who, by the way, Denny McCarthy is in the first group off of hole number 1, that more scoreable side that I want my guys on early tomorrow. Maybe I turn the blind eye because he's not going to be chalk, right? If he's like 5 to 10% owned in Showdown, which I haven't ran on my projections quite yet, so I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to have Denny McCarthy. But if he's like 7.5% owned, something about that, I'm going to be thrilled to play him in 15 to 20% of my lineups because he has that early tee time, even if the shots gained metrics aren't great. Like, I know he gained nearly 1.5 strokes around the green, but he also lost 2 strokes putting. And he's historically one of the best POA putters that we have in all the world, let alone what we have in this kind of field. So approach play has got to improve, but some of the chalk guys like a Sepp Straka, he's also going to be playing over there at Pebble Beach. Højgaard and Henley, as we've already talked about, like those are going to be players that I'm actively avoiding in my lineups, not just because of the around the green play and the putting, but also because they're mega chalk. Something to remember about the leaderboard, guys, and I think it goes without being said, most of you guys probably know this when it comes to Showdown, all that. The top end of the board is by far the highest owned of the bunch. Guys like a Henley, Højgaard, Straka, Hovland, all of those sort of players are going to be your highest owned over there for round 2 Showdown. The added caveat, the guys that are on Pebble Beach, so your Henley, Straka, Højgaard, that are all going to be on the easier golf course for round number 2, are going to be even higher owned than some of the guys that already played Pebble Beach. So for example, like, Hovland had a really good round. I think he'll get a lot more steam than what he had for main slate. He's not going to be mega chalk in round 2 because he's playing the wrong course. Doesn't make him a good play, by the way. I don't think you should be playing guys that are over there at Spyglass Hill, but the ownership is really going to center around those guys that went low on Spyglass. So personally, I'm not playing any of those top 3. I'm planning on avoiding a Straka, Højgaard, and a Henley just because I know that they're going to be mega chalk. I'm talking like 20, 25% ownership, and that's something that I'm personally looking to avoid. On the other end of the around the green spectrum, guys that lost a bunch of strokes around the green, that lost a bunch of strokes putting, could be in for a little bit of a bounce back. So when it comes to the around the green, you got guys like Bill Zalatoris that could be in for a little bit of a bounce back. A Ricky Fowler. Now, Fowler already played Pebble Beach, so maybe don't use him. But some of these guys like Willie Z, that I believe is going to be on Pebble Beach for round number 2, could be a look for a little bit of a bounce back. Keith Mitchell in that first group off of hole number 1 could be a look. Adam Scott, also one of the first few groups off and going off of hole number 1, could be a little bit of a bounce back candidate because of the strokes that he lost around the green. A Jason Day, who I believe has an early-ish tee time, is going off of hole 10, but that's not the end of the world. as I was mentioning before, could be in for a little bit of a short game bounce back. The same thing with the putter. If you go to the bottom end of the putting list, guys like a Doug Gim, you're not thinking he's going to lose 5 strokes putting again. Cam Young also playing at Pebble Beach, those top 2. Probably not expecting those guys to lose 4.5, 5 strokes putting. And Scott losing 3.5 strokes putting, like that's unheard of. There's a lot of bounce backs that you can look for as well. So, we want to give props to the players that are doing it sustainably, but we also want to give a little bit of a leash to some of the guys that didn't play as well, and that maybe it was because of a shoddy short game. And a lot of times that's just a luck out there from round to round on tour. So if you're looking for bounce backs, I think that's the best way to do so. Try and find guys that are due for some short game regression, which, speaking of, the stone is going to be very useful for that over there in round 2 showdown. The round 2 expectancy is the main thing you guys want to look at, right? How guys performed historically over there in round 2. You also want to look at some of the bounce back regression, guys that kind of struggled in round 1. If you're trying to find some bounce backs, it's not a bad idea to look for some bad round regression. And then because we have the shots gained metrics from Spyglass Hill, we are going to have the approach series over there for this event. So make sure to look at those approach deltas, try and find some really positive numbers over there in that approach delta category. And you're going to be pretty good over there for your round 2 lineups. So obviously there's a lot of different data points you want to use. Raw shots gained metrics are part of the puzzle, but having those round 2 historical stats, those bounce back, those short game regressions, all of that data is what makes a well-rounded process. So make sure to check out SHIPIT Nation if you guys haven't already for all the content over there on the stone, which, by the way, if you guys are thinking that this is the stone out there for all 4 rounds, it's not. This is the main slate stone, right? This is just an example to show you guys what they have over there on the site. Over there for Showdown, they're going to have one posted probably in the next hour or so, I'd imagine, over there on their site with everything updated just for round 2 showdown. So, a lot of these different categories are going to change, but it's going to be a lot of that stuff I was mentioning that you can use in your round 2 process. So make sure to keep that in mind when we go through all of that as well. What we're going to do to tie this all together is we're going to build a lineup together. And I'm going to show you guys the different ways that you can construct a lineup using, first off, some guys towards the top that you're going to have to play some chalk. Your conviction plays, like what am I looking for in those players? I already kind of mentioned with the Scheffler and JT what I'm looking for in those plays up top. But with those tee times, I'm going to show you guys where you can mix in some of these earlier tee times to offset some of those chalkier guys up towards the top. So let me get a sip of my drink. Let me see if there is any comments to go over, and then let's build a lineup together. What's going on, Nicholas? What's going on, Jay Steele and Wheelman as well? Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic day. What's going on, Sites? Couldn't watch much Henley. Was he just scrambling and putting his brains out? He was. So the eye test would kind of say that as well. It was a lot of long putts he was making. Is it mathematically possible for Aberg to come back and win? No, probably not, Wheelman. From +5, I mean, anything's technically possible. It's going to take a whole lot of choking from the top end of the board, but the outright's dead, right? I'll be the first one to tell you. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yeah, he's probably not winning. What's going on, Buck? He said, Luke Demand was up. Thanks for grinding. Of course. Welcome on in. Let me know if you have any questions. And what do I think about Rory? So a lot of my quote-unquote thoughts when it comes to players usually comes down to the shots gained metrics. And as I mentioned, he looked sharp today. The ace obviously inflates the approach numbers, but he gained off the tee, he gained on approach, and he lost with the flat stick. So I would say that the arrow is pointing up over there for Rory McIlroy. I think the course fit's decent as well. With firm greens, his super high ball flight is only going to help him if it gets firmer throughout the weekend. I think he's in a good spot. So hopefully that answers your question. If you were curious about anything in particular, just let me know. But let's build a lineup together. So up top, we're just going to knock that out right out of the way. I don't hate the idea of starting with a Scotty Scheffler and a JT. Both absolutely lit it up on approach, and you're going to be taking some ownership at these two. I'm probably going to have Scotty close to 40% over there in my ownership projections. The JT is going to be at least 25% owned out there in my projections as well. But as I mentioned previously, you're going to have spots to get different down towards the middle to bottom end of the board. And the kind of players that I'm really looking to do it with are guys like a Denny McCarthy. I mean, he already talked that he's due for some short game regression, probably not going to lose 2 strokes putting again. And he's literally the first group off, which is ideal with the low wins early in the day. And he's a player that I also took for a top 10 bet, and he was one of my core plays down towards the bottom. So not the hottest start out there for Denny for sure, but I have faith in him, right? There's a reason why I was so high on him this week out there in my process. And if he's going to be the first man off, finally gets the easy golf course to go out there and play, like he's the perfect candidate out here for a round 2 play. So I'm going to throw Denny McCarthy out there into that lineup. And then I'm also going to play Keith Mitchell, who we saw that he was due for a little bit of a round the green regression. But what I really like about Keith Mitchell is that he's a high birdie percentage player. If you take a look at the stats from 2024, he was the number 3 birdie percentage player on all the PGA Tour. I believe it was like, I knew Scotty was number 1. I forget who was number 2, but he was number 3 out there on tour. So at $6,600, you're getting a hyper aggressive player, perfect tee time. And, maybe McCarthy and Keith Mitchell, this is a little added benefit of playing 2 guys from the same group. Maybe they get hot tomorrow. They go out there, they can kind of draw off of each other's momentum. We've seen that a ton out there on the PGA Tour, right? Guys that are first round leaders out there from the same group. It's a little bit of game theory, a little bit of correlation, I guess, out there between those two. But not only can you take 2 guys and have the optimal tee time, but maybe you have some correlation there. Now, one could obviously go off and one could have a really shitty day, but it's worth mentioning as we've seen that bear out a few times on the PGA Tour. Here in the 7K range, you also want to take somebody that's maybe average to below averagely owned. So let's actually take a look at the tee times and try and find somebody that way. I think an Adam Scott, after his really shitty round 1, shot, I believe, over par round 1, which considering the conditions is about as bad as it gets. But, he's a perfect bounce back candidate. I mean, he was chalk for a reason this week. He was one of the more popular players that we had here in the 7K range. A lot of it's course history. A lot of it was the form as well. Like, why not take a shot on him there at $7,700 for a little bit of a bounce back? And we can't go through a whole lineup here together because that would be against the terms of service. Let me just double check that Adam Scott's on the proper side, by the way. I don't want to be like throwing a guy into the lineup that's playing the wrong golf course. So yeah, he's Pebble Beach like I was expecting. So no worries there. Your last man in, I don't want to say that you can use whoever the hell you want to, but because we've got 3 pivots already jammed into this lineup, I've got McCarthy at single digit for sure. I think Keith Mitchell will probably be sub 5% owned. And Adam Scott, you're probably looking at like 10% ownership, give or take 1 or 2% out there in either direction. Your last man in here, even if they were like 10% owned, you're probably fine in the large field GBP. Like, you've got 2 pieces of chalk, but you've got 3 pivots and then 1 guy who's at worst about averagely owned for your last man in. If you go over here and you leave some salary on the table, if you take somebody that's a little bit more of a pivot, then you're talking about a lineup that has a ton of leverage and all the differentiation that you need over there in the big $5 or $20 GPP. So a lot of this comes down to the contest that you're entering. This was more so the thought process for a large field GPP, where you're entering like the big $20 over there for round 2 showdown. In that kind of contest, we're really worried about getting different to the field, not only so that we have leverage to move up the leaderboards, but also so that we're not duplicating ourselves with 50 to 100 other people. Like, that's the worst possible thing that we can do. Now in PGA, it's a little bit harder to have that many duplicates, but even if it's only like 3 other lineups that you duplicated with, that is really detrimental to your long-term ROI. So, ensuring that you have that leverage is important. But even in that large field GPP, right, it wasn't rocket science for us to go and differentiate from a relatively chalky start. Now, if you started with a pivot up top, so let's say that maybe you still have JT in your lineup, but you went with an O'Bear, hoping for the bounce back, which I've got to say, I'm going to play O'Bear in my player pool. I know I mentioned that the shots gained metrics don't look great, that he has the flu and all of that, but as I mentioned with DGen's saying, right, or he could. And trust me, a player like O'Bear, that is one of the best, top 3 player, in my opinion, out there in the world, could for sure, or he could, over there in round number 2, is the kind of guy, I mean, if you started with him up top, you could round out this lineup with whoever the hell you wanted to at that point, because this lineup would only have 1 true chalky player in it over there with Justin Thomas. So if you're in a single entry, that sort of thing, I don't think you have to get that different up top. I think that'd be kind of overdoing it by getting off of like a guy like a Scotty Scheffler. But if you really like an O'Bear, like you're convinced that he's going to go out there and have a low round, it gives you all the flexibility in the world. I mean, hell, if you're avoiding a JT up top, let's say that you're going like Hideki O'Bear as your start, Now, that's a pretty cheap start. You can see our last minute would be a whole $9,700 if we made that kind of adjustment there. But this would be truly no chalk involved at all, right? Hideki's going to be like sub 15%. Aubert might even be single digit owned over there if you're a round 2 showdown. You went with this kind of lineup. You're talking about like unlimited leverage. Now, I think that this would only be for the large field GPPs. If you're going to get this wild about your lineup construction, you're only entering that kind of contest in that big $20. Like if you're in the big single entry, a cash contest, that sort of thing, you're batshit crazy, right? We're going for pivots across all 5-6 spots. But in those large field GPPs, in a format like Showdown, which by the way, golf, one of the more variant sports that we have in all of DFS, when you make it just a 1-round sample size of 18 holes, that is just put on steroids. It's exponentially more chaotic when we only have an 18-hole sample size. Sometimes you want to embrace that in the large field GPPs. So that's what I'll say about your lineup construction. You want to cater it for the contests that you're entering. And in those large field GPPs, I would just say try and get as different as humanly possible. You can never be different enough if you're truly going for that game theory edge. And considering, if you're just going after Pebble Beach guys and then playing that game theory edge, that sounds like a good way to make some high upside GPP lineups, right? You have that weather edge locked in. And if you're going after some of those low-owned guys like Aubert, Hideki, if you hit in your player pool, you have guys that are shooting -6, -7 tomorrow over there at Pebble Beach, you're going to be in such a good situation. I mean, for example, if guys like Scheffler go off, JT at like 20, 35% ownership out there a pop, it's going to be good to have them, but you're sharing them with thousands of other people. Whereas if you're building some of those low-owned, highly leveraged lineups, you're not holding hands with the entire field if they're going off at like 8 to 10% ownership. So that's why I mentioned building that way out there for tomorrow. And another thing to remember, chaotic sport, only an 18-hole sample size. We've only seen 18 holes this week. So the people that are overreacting to what we saw over there in round number 1, I think you're making a massive mistake when it comes to their process. You need to be a little bit more level-headed, in my opinion, when you're going out there and playing PGA DFS, especially when it's only been a 1-day sample size. Aubert, for as shitty as he felt today, likely on the golf course, you'd have to imagine that fit into the +5. He could wake up tomorrow and feel fantastic. Same thing with Hideki. He looked a little bit tight out there with his golf swing. He wakes up certain days and feels horrible. Then the next day, he'll wake up and shoot like a -7, -8. You want to embrace that when you're playing in those large field GPPs. And that's my 2 cents over here for tomorrow's slate. My boy Rasmus is really impressive to watch. Absolutely stripes it. Yeah, he's my boy from over there on the DP World Tour. I've got to say the fro he's got going too, the little lettuce he's got there in the back. I like it. I like when players aren't afraid to grow out their hair a little bit, as you can tell with the longer hair out back. So he's my boy. By the way, he hits the ball an absolute country mile. So I got to say I'm fading him for a showdown tomorrow, but I like to see it. I played him main slate, so he took advantage there at least. Of course, Michael, welcome on in. And yeah, that's all we got. And the last question is, how many spots should I devote to being different? The small contest, you want at least 1 or 2 pivots. So if you're talking like single entries, like a 500 to 1,000 entry contest, that sort of thing, 1 or 2 spots at the very least. But I mean, if you have 3, 4 pivots, I'm not against it. It's an 18-hole sample size. It is Showdown. So if there's a spot to really embrace the chaos of golf, it is out there on this kind of format. So I would say 1 or 2 is a good number, but if you've got a few more, lurking in there, it's not the end of the world either. But that's all I've got, guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by into the live stream as per usual. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Subscribe to the SHIPIT Nation YouTube channel because we'll be going live out there for rounds 3 and 4 as well. And if you guys are looking for the betting and prop side of things, make sure to check out my YouTube channel over there at LukeDFS for all that content for rounds 2 through 4. A little bit later on this evening, I'll be going live on my channel, going through underdog, prize picks, 3 balls, matchups over there on sites like DraftKings and FanDuel. So if you guys do betting, do prop stuff on top of the DFS and Showdown that we have here, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, that's LukeDFS over there on YouTube, and we'll be live a little bit later on this evening. That's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. Best of luck. Let's ship it out there for round number 2, and I'll see you guys out there for rounds 3 and 4.